Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and I have a curriculum review to share with you today for the materials that we use for our Astronomy Main Lesson block. Now I have far fewer materials here than what you might have seen in our How to Put Together an Astronomy Unit Study, and that's because this review is for the first section of a two-part main lesson block. So these are the materials that we use for this 3-week main lesson block, and we used our Live-Education Waldorf curriculum for inspiration for this unit, and we basically went through this first section almost exactly how the curriculum presented it. So this curriculum is set up with two different sections, the first one being on the constellations and the second one dealing with more of the math and the science of astronomy. So because my son is a little bit on the young side for his grade level, we decided just to stick with this part, and if we had time later in the year, I would go into this section which involves a bit more math, but it seems like we're going to start off the following year with a main lesson block on astronomy and do the second part of it. So the first part is about 3 weeks, the second part is about 4 weeks. Now, in addition to this curriculum, we also had a couple of other resource materials. Now, one that the book does recommend that you use is a book on Greek myths, because the stories of the constellations are derived from Greek mythology and Roman mythology. So we went ahead and we read stories out of this book to complement our lesson. And we didn't do a Greek mythology main lesson block prior to doing this main lesson block, but in general, a main lesson block on Greek mythology is supposed to precede the main lesson block on astronomy. So this block usually comes in the 5th year and this one comes in the 6th year. So I focused a lot more on the Greek mythology related to the constellations, and so we did use this book along with our curriculum, and I'm going to tell you more about how we like both of them, but I actually want to focus on this book first, primarily because I've gotten a lot of questions about this book, and especially because some of the reviews on Amazon left people wondering whether it was going to be a good book or not. Now, this particular book goes over 2 different main lesson blocks, the geology and the astronomy. We previously did the geology sections, which have 14 different chapters, and we loved it. I loved the way that it was presented. It was presented in respect to the students who live in a particular part of the world, and in general, your geology unit and your mineralogy unit needs to have some relevance to where you are living. And so that would be the only concern with this book, with the geology section. But aside from that, we read it the way it was, and we really enjoyed it. Now, the astronomy section also has a lot of references to Scotland, where this teacher taught in the Waldorf school, and you can either read it as is or you can alter it so that it is more relevant to where you are living in the world. Now, the thing about this book is that these were the notes that this particular teacher had compiled in preparation for each of these lessons. And so it is written, well, actually, the notes were kind of edited and then collected to make this book. So it is presented in a way that you might almost imagine yourself as a student in the classroom. Like, these were his lectures. They're really engaging. They're written in a way that almost feels like spoken language rather than written language. I really enjoyed them, and you can go about this in 2 different ways. You can either read the chapters the way they are and use that as either the content for your main lesson or to accompany your main lesson, or you can pre-read the content and then deliver your lessons. Because of being short on time, we went ahead and just read the lessons the way they were. And because the lessons are, well, I chose to do 1 chapter as 1 lesson because each of the chapters are fairly short and they contain just the right amount of new content. I went ahead and read them, and it took about 20 minutes or so to read each of these chapters. However, it took far longer for us to actually do the lesson because we would spend a lot of time kind of either reiterating the content or talking about it, or I would like I would read it, but then I would pause and I'd kind of retell it to my son to make sure that he really understood what was going on, because though there isn't a ton of new content, it does progress fairly quickly. And if you don't completely understand one of the new concepts, then it might be hard to progress with that in the coming chapters. So it would take us about 40 minutes to go over it. I really enjoyed it. Now, my son didn't always want to sit right next to me in order to look at the diagrams, and I think that these lessons would be enhanced if you could draw out the diagrams as you're presenting the lesson, which would require you to pre-read the lesson and to fully understand it so that you could present it and talk about it as you're doing the diagrams. And because I didn't have that kind of time, I would just be presenting it as reading it aloud, which meant that if there were concepts that were that I needed refreshing on, or they were a new way of teaching it, then I wasn't quite as prepared to go into further discussion about it. So that's just something to be mindful of. The other thing is that the approach that the Waldorf curriculum takes in presenting any main lesson block really, but especially the sciences, is a little bit different than you would normally have with other curricula. So it takes a minute just to kind of get into why it's being presented this way. And so with each lesson, or rather with each main lesson block, whether it's this book or whether it's this curriculum, it's going to have the first couple lessons be something that draws the student in so that the student can have a relationship with the content. So for this particular book, the way it does that is by making a connection between your heartbeat and the sun, and then from that, it continues with that analogy a little bit, and then it kind of departs from it, and then you can just kind of go into the science. For this curriculum, the way that it does that is that it looks at the different constellations in the sky, and that's from the perspective of the child or of the student on this planet, looking up at this night sky. The things that are going to stand out the most after the moon are the constellations. And so it makes a connection with the student by talking about the constellations, and more so by bringing in stories to explain the constellations. And so for this particular curriculum, it's talking about the Greek and Roman mythology and those stories about, how the constellations got their name and why, what the stories are behind those. And so that's the connection that this curriculum uses in order to begin those lessons. And then later on to get into more of the, I guess you can consider it more of the dry material, because it's maybe not the story part. However, I really, really like the way this second section of the main lesson block progresses. I find it completely fascinating, and I really love the way that it's still from the perspective of the student on this planet and what he or she can see when they are looking out at the night sky. So this particular book goes through about 27 chapters to discuss the main lesson block on astronomy. Now, because we split up our main lesson block into two sections, our first section was only 3 weeks long, and so we only covered 15 out of the 27 chapters that are on astronomy, and we'll continue with this book when we get to our second part of our main lesson block. However, I think that there are some chapters in here that would be beneficial for us to review and to read over again before moving on. So overall, I really like this book. I think that the reviews that are posted on Amazon, it's a little bit hard to judge the quality of the book. 2 of the reviews were favorable, but they basically said well written or nice book. They didn't really give any more to that review, and the negative review was incredibly negative, and some parts were just uncalled for with the negativity. However, the part that the reviewer really had a problem with was the mysticism involved in this book, and I would venture to say it was mostly part of the astronomy chapters and not so much the geology chapters. And for that, I would have to say that when it comes to the main lesson blocks in a Waldorf curriculum, it's going to bring up, especially for the astronomy, it's going to bring up the ancient civilizations and a lot of their perspectives on astronomy. And so it's possible that that's what the reviewer had a problem with. I'm not really sure. We really liked the book. I found that this would be enough to either create your own main lesson block, and it's definitely enough to complement either whatever current curriculum that you're using, and also it would complement a Waldorf curriculum. Now, the one thing that I wasn't expecting, I guess I was a little naive in thinking that all Waldorf curricula would approach the subject matter the same way and with the same sequence, but it didn't. And so I really thought that this book, each chapter would kind of reflect what we were doing in our main lesson book and for our curriculum, and it really didn't. This was very different, even though I think that when we finally get to our second section in this main lesson block, I think there are some stories that definitely are reflected in these different chapters. It just does not follow the same progression at all. So that was something that I wasn't expecting. However, I think that it ended up being a good thing, in part because we were able to do a little bit more of what I'm going to just say the science part of astronomy, along with the mythology related to the constellations, even though I had intended to keep that for our second part of our main lesson block. So this actually served as a great introduction to those concepts that we are going to revisit when we do our second part of our main lesson block. Now, in the past, mostly I would have done this as an enormous main lesson block lasting 7, 8, or even 9 weeks so that we could cover everything in one go. But I found that that was posing a problem for us in our homeschool with, staying interested and being able just to kind of wrap up and not just have this enormous amount of time where things just kind of lingered and dragged on unnecessarily. And so we were really good about finishing this in 3 weeks without very much other without too much other things to do that kind of trailed into our next unit, our next main lesson block. And in part, it's because we really stuck close to the curriculum and didn't do too many extra things. And so for this particular main lesson block, there aren't a lot of additional videos that show our lessons and show our projects, just because we didn't do that many of them. All right, so both of these are amazing resources for doing astronomy in a way that I guarantee you haven't done before unless you've done a Waldorf curriculum. We really enjoy the Dolliers books. There are many of them. We have a few of them, and this is the one on the Greek myths. It comes with some really great illustrations, and the stories are just really fun to read. They're fairly short, so that it's easy to divide this up and add it on a daily basis to whatever unit that you're doing, because you can just assign one chapter per day and it doesn't take too long. Some of the chapters are really short, just a page long, and some of them are longer, but each one works to flow into the next chapter really well. And I really like that approach for this book. So you do not need to do the Greek myths with your astronomy main lesson block, and you do not need to do the Greek mythology with your Greek main lesson block if you're opposed to doing a lot of the mythologies. You don't have to do them at all. Your units will work just fine without them. The reason why they are included with these different main lesson blocks is so that the students can understand the culture and the religion of the people at the time, and it really helps to introduce the rest of the concepts so they're not so dry. It really brings the human aspect, and it helps you understand what they believed in. So that is why it was included in the main lesson block. I want to show you the 4 picture books that we included for this main lesson block, and this was kind of an afterthought, in part because I needed some more content for my younger student, and she was 6 at the time that we did this, and so having a couple of picture books kind of helped so that she didn't feel like she was left out from the main lesson block. So we have Look Up, and this is the story of Henrietta Leavitt, and she is an astronomer back in the 1800s, I believe, back at a time where there were very few female scientists, and even if they weren't given the same recognition as male scientists. And so this doubles as both a book about science, but also a book about female role models. We also have Astronaut Scott Kelly, My Journey to the Stars, and I really like this book. This was written for me in a different way than I was expecting. It's not just a picture book, but you also get actual photographs of this astronaut's youth and throughout his whole life. So we really like this book, and this did not coordinate at all with any of the content that we were studying in our main lesson block, but I still really enjoyed adding this in. I think biographies in the form of picture books are fantastic. Margaret and the Moon, and this is another female scientist. So this works with our female role models unit that I am putting together, as well as a book about astronomy. And so this is more of this previous century, so in the 1900s, with the lunar landing. So this would be the 1960s. And we really enjoyed this book, but I have to say that my daughter wasn't as interested in these books as I thought that she would be. We have a number of books on female role models, and she preferred some of the other ones more than these ones, but at least this is an option for you if you wanted to bring in some more biographies and picture books into your astronomy main lesson block. We also did On a Beam of Light, and this is the story of Albert Einstein, and I really, really like the way that this story is presented. It's done in a really relatable manner. It brings some of these really huge scientific concepts that are sometimes really hard for adults to grapple. It brings it down to a really simple understanding. Like it's written in a really easy way to understand some of these things for both adults and children. So if you ever wondered about some of these things, then this would be a great introduction to them in a really simple manner. So I really like this book, and it's kind of related to our unit, but more so it was just another nice picture book to add to this main lesson block. The last thing I want to show you is the astronomy main lesson book that my son did. This main lesson book is new to us. It comes with these beautiful blue pages to do your constellations, and then your white pages for your written, the written narrations. And so we used some whiteout for the different stars, and then we used a white color pencil in order to connect them. So some of them turned out okay, and some turned out really great. He didn't always draw the different images around each one, but for like the Great Bear he did, and then some of these other ones he just connected the different stars rather than drawing the whole image around it. He did a narration for I think 14 out of the 15 lessons that we did. And then he decorated the front. I used my Silhouette Cameo in order to write out or to cut out the title for this one. So this main lesson book was fantastic. I really like it. It's really good quality, and I wish there were more lessons that we could do using the blue pages. I thought maybe we could do pastels on this for like a completely unrelated main lesson block. So overall, this was a really, really good quality main lesson book. They're really affordably priced as well. And the only thing that I had to do, which at this age would not be necessary, but I still wrote in the lines. My son had a hard time doing his narrations without some lines in it, so I just hand drew the lines rather than getting a ruler out. So they're not always straight, but they were straighter than what he would have done if he just wrote it on his own. And this is also a principle in the Waldorf education to not have the lines, especially with the younger children. There are lined notebooks as the children get older, maybe 6th grade and up, possibly. But in the younger years, especially because the students may still be writing in really a large format, sometimes the lined paper might not be the right size for the student, but also it's so that the student can learn how to orient. It's actually twofold, not just to orient the letters and the words on the page, but it has symbolic relevance in the student learning how to orient himself within the greater community of the classroom or his family. It mirrors what the student is trying to do developmentally in his real life, and it also mirrors that now with the written narration and trying to construct these these lines so that they're evenly spaced and so they have proportion and whatnot. So anyway, that is a little tidbit on why you may find a lot of main lesson books without the lines, and that's just one of the reasons. All right, so the last thing I want to show you is actually a project that we did. We had a Nature Watch classroom kit for the phases of the moon, and I do have a video on this so that you can see how, I mean, it was super easy to put together. And then we played memory. It's a memory game. So it comes with an answer key and then these different tiles, and you just flip them over and you try to match the black tiles with the white tiles. And the kids were moderately happy with the project. They weren't like, oh my gosh, this is the best project ever. So I would say it's a great idea, and you could probably DIY this yourself pretty easily. But if you've got a classroom, then getting a kit like this is going to be amazing because it comes with everything you need in order to do this project, and it's a great way to learn the different phases of the moon. And the alternative that we did with this is that we then did the phases of the moon using cookies, and then as my two children played this game, whoever won, matched up a set, they could eat that cookie that coordinated with the set. So it's our little twist on playing memory, and having that project, which I'm sure you have seen all over the internet because it's pretty popular. So anyway, that is another one that we did that we enjoyed. And so if you want to see that video, it's also linked down in the description box below. So overall, we really liked using all the resources that we had for this main lesson block, especially the Astronomy and Geology book by Charles Kovacs. And of course, we had our main lesson book from our curriculum, Live-Education. If you have any questions about the materials that we used for this main lesson block, please leave them in the comment section below this video. And if you want to see the few projects that we did for this main lesson block, you can tap on the screen right now for that complete playlist.